All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Sports Corner at Choose Adventure Media. My name is Zach, and today I will be recapping the Ducks' 41-7 win over the in-state rivals Oregon State Beavers. Great game, obviously. The game started out a little bit slow. I was tied 7-7 at the end of the first quarter. In the first half, the Ducks weren't really connecting on those big explosive plays that we've seen them connecting on. But before I get into it any deeper, I'd love to hear from you guys in the chat. What were your biggest takeaways from the game? What were you stoked to see? What were you impressed by? What were you not impressed by? Um, who were, as always, who was the offensive MVP? Who was the defensive MVP? Would love to hear from you guys in chat. So, as we all know, the first quarter was a little bit sluggish. Kind of like what I was saying in my stream when I was talking about the Northwestern game. The big long drive that the Beavers had, when I think it was a 13 or 14 play drive that ended off in a touchdown, that's the recipe. If a team like Oregon State's going to upset a team like Oregon, that's what you have to do every single drive. Those big, grind it out, keep their defense on the field, keep the explosive offense off the field. And Oregon State did that. And that's why at the end of the first quarter, that's why it was tied 7-7. That and the Ducks just weren't connecting on those big explosive plays. They were just a hair off. Jaden Lamar had a couple of runs where he was, tackled by a shoestring, or the ball was just overthrown, and then as the game went on, we saw more and more of those start to connect, more of those explosive plays as the Beaver defense started to get grinded down. You saw those start to hit more and be executed more. So I think Jerry Mixon, first of all, I just want to talk about him. I think he's by far the defensive MVP of the season so far through 4 games. I'm so impressed with his pass coverage. And I know I've talked a lot on this channel about how impressed I am by the Ducks secondary and the young secondary that they have and their ability to play the run. And today we saw a couple of miscues from them. However, Jerry Mixon is an amazing pass defending linebacker. I think he's the college equivalent of a Fred Warner, of just an amazing looks like a former safety playing linebacker. Just amazing pass defense, breaks up the ball, passes. I'm absolutely in love with Jerry Mixon, and I think he's been the Ducks' defensive MVP so far this season. And again, on the Beavers drive, they were unable to stop the run, and that's kind of concerning going into next week. That's been a concern going back to last season and this season so far. The Ducks defense did improve against the run over the course of the game, and it did get a little bit better. But especially in that first half, the Beavers were really able to run the ball effectively. And that's obviously a big concern when the Ducks next week are going to be playing 2 of the best running backs in all of college football, in Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen at Penn State. Then, as I mentioned, there was the blown coverage on the first drive by the Beavers. There were a couple of miscues of not communicating and passing off zones. That's a little bit concerning because the Ducks have been playing a lot of man coverage, and they have the athletes and they have the talent on the outside to play a lot of man coverage. However, you can't play man coverage every down, and it's concerning that they weren't able to communicate on passing off zones and passing off receivers on scissor concepts and such. However, I'm happy that it happened this week because I think that's something that can easily be cleaned up throughout the week. I think that's something that Tosh Lupoy can look at the Penn State offense and see what kind of route concepts that they like to run and prepare the defense and be able to more specifically communicate on how to pass off zones there. So I think that can get cleaned up, but just a couple of small red flags by the defense today and not being able to stop the run in the first half, and then a couple of miscommunications on zone coverage. Luckily, it really only hurt them on that one pass down deep in the red zone. But there was one later on in the game. I think it was in the third quarter. It was the wide receiver was wide open over the middle of the field, and the Beaver quarterback just missed him. But the offense, I think, looked great. Decorian Moore, as always, looked fantastic. I'm so impressed by Dante Moore. I'm more and more impressed with him every single week. I think he shows a lot of ability and a lot of talents with his timing and his decision making. He plays really well within structure, and for a younger quarterback, that's typically something that's harder to do. Dante Moore only making, I think today may have been his 8th start in his college career. So that's really impressive that he is able to operate within structure. And what do I mean by that? I mean, in the late 2000s, 2010s, we saw players like Baker Mayfield, um, Murray, the guy from Oklahoma. He's now the can't think of his name right now. Kyler Murray. They and Johnny Manziel, they made their livings by whenever, the play would break down or their first read wasn't initially there, they would run outside the pocket or make these flashy crossbody throws back across the middle of the field on these long plays. That's outside of structure. Structure is, I'm going to my first read, I'm going to my second read, maybe a third read. If you can get to your third read in college, that's incredibly impressive. So that's the difference between playing in structure and on time versus out of structure. And Dante Moore, so far this season, because of the defenses that they've been playing, hasn't had to play out of structure. However, I think today he showed that he excels at it. Obviously, today we also saw his ability to scramble whenever the play does break down or whenever his first two reads aren't there. Multiple times we saw him go through multiple reads and then they weren't there, and he was very decisive in tucking the ball and running. And I don't know if any of you guys watched the Florida LSU game last week, but that was something that DJ Lagway was not doing. And what's incredibly frustrating about DJ Lagway is that I think he was making those mistakes last year, and DJ Lagway has not improved at all. I don't know what happened over the offseason, but he's making very freshman mistakes in his second year as a starter. Granted, it's not his second full season, but still. But Dante's decision making is very impressive, because what we see a lot of times, particularly in college, is players will go through their first read, second read, and then they'll kind of go outside of the pocket, and they're not being decisive either way of whether they're keeping their eyes downfield, looking for options, or being decisive and tucking it and running. And Dante, I think today proved that there were several plays he kept his eyes downfield, eyes downfield, nothing was there. I'm going to tuck the ball and I'm going to run. I'm going to get 4 yards, dive, and live to see the next play. And that was something DJ Lagway didn't do last week, and that's why he threw 5 interceptions against LSU, is because he tried to play hero ball. Dante Moore was incredibly smart today. He was great on his timing. Obviously, he has all the arm talent in the world. I'm so impressed by Dante Moore, and I think he's the perfect fit for Will Stein's offense, and I think that's going to carry the Ducks really, really far. Obviously, Bryce Betcher was playing on another level today. I think he had 9 tackles in the first half. He was great last year, but I think he's taken another step forward this year. And is honestly on a projection for an All-American type season. Jerry Mixon is phenomenal against the pass and is very good against the run, but Bryce Betcher against the run, man, is that classic old school hard-nosed, hard-hitting, downhill playing linebacker. You gotta love it with the neck roll and everything. I love Bryce Betcher, and he took today's game very personally. I don't know if any of you guys saw the post-game comments about his feelings about the Oregon State Beavers. But Bryce Betcher was playing like a man out of his mind today, and I'm very impressed by Bryce Betcher. Let's see. Again, in the first quarter, they just weren't able to connect on those big explosive plays that we've seen so far this season. Dante Moore is amazing at throwing those back shoulder fades. The broadcasters were talking about that a lot. And those are really hard passes to throw. And also it takes a lot of just chemistry with your wide receivers, and it takes a lot of anticipation. And that's a big NFL quality. And I think, yes, there may be some quarterbacks. Arguably, Dante Moore is the best quarterback in college football right now. However, I don't know if it's necessarily arguably that he's the best, most NFL-ready quarterback right now because of the anticipation that he's playing with. There was one pass that he missed in the second half to Gary Bryant Jr. because Gary Bryant Jr. slipped on a little whip route outside. But the reason he missed is because he played with anticipation. He threw the ball before Gary Bryant was even out of his break. And that's why Dante Moore missed him. That ball, if Gary Bryant Jr. wouldn't have slipped, would have been in the exact spot that you want. And it's the same thing on these back shoulder fade routes that we saw, I think 3 of that I can think of off the top of my head in the red zone today. Is he threw 3 excellent back shoulder fades. And that's just the passes and the accuracy that he's throwing with. There's no defense for it. Like, a lot of times those were great pass coverage by the DB. but there's no pass coverage for a perfectly thrown ball, and Dante threw so many of those today. So I'm just so impressed by Dante Moore. He had a couple more misses than we've seen today, but I feel like his misses were smaller today than we've seen. Earlier on in the season, he's had a couple of big misses per game, but today the misses were very small if he did have them. So very impressed by Dante Moore. He clearly has put in a lot of time and effort in building these relationships with his wide receivers, and I think he is demonstrating right now abilities and skills of a very top end NFL quarterback prospect. And then at the same time, he had perfect ball placement. And then on the touchdown pass to Kenyon Sadiq, that where Kenyon Sadiq was kind of wide open in the end zone. I love that Dante didn't try to get fancy and lead him in any particular direction. He just saw an open man, tossed it to his open man. Get your playmakers the ball. If you see a man wide open, get him the ball. Don't try to lead him up the field and risk, overthrowing him. I think it just shows that Dante Moore's processing ability and able to understand the moment and understand down, distance, and situation is at such an elite level for a guy only making his 10th college start, 8th college start, something like that. Very impressed by Dante Moore, not only in his arm talent and his physical abilities, but just his mental processing, his anticipation, and was even showing some leadership that they showed on the broadcast of going around to the different position groups when the game was closer in the first half and just really communicating with them and trying to be a leader that I think he's growing into for sure every game. I think the Ducks defense is proving, while they're having a couple of miscues per game, I think they're proving that they're very disciplined. We've seen it earlier on in the season with some trick plays, and today we saw it on the speed option. I believe it was on a third or a fourth down, where the Ducks got a stop. Or no, I'm sorry, they ended up getting like a yard, but it was just textbook defense against a speed option, and that's just very impressive. And that's finally, we talk a lot about Dan Lanning, bringing the SEC mindset to West Coast football, and I think that really exemplifies that. Is that it's disciplined, it's textbook every single play, and that's what I'm so impressed with this team, is that they do all the little things so well. They don't get trick by trick plays. They play the speed option incredibly well. I'm just so. Oh, and then later on in the game against the Screens, the team was so disciplined and knew exactly where to be. And I'm just so impressed by this defense and how disciplined they are. And while they do occasionally have the big miscues, those can be cleaned up. Teaching discipline in the middle of the season is a lot harder. Again, I have another note here about Moore doing a great job of using his feet and being very decisive. That's really hard to teach, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of work on the quarterback's part, and I think he is showing that, and I think that's going to come in big next week in a big game at Penn State. That's going to be a tough defense, and so he's not going to have the time that he even had today against Oregon State, or that he's had against any of the opponents that the Ducks have played so far. So I think being decisive against a more talented defense is going to be huge. He's going to get to his first read, going to get to his second read. I don't know if he'll have much time beyond that. So then having the ability to know, tuck it, run, get a few yards, live to see the next play, don't throw an interception. I think that's huge. And I think Dante Moore is showing he has that. I also love seeing the dominance in the goal line situations that we've seen so far by the Ducks. Granted, again, they have been playing lesser opponents, so it's not really fair whenever you have the guys in the trenches that the Ducks have compared to their opponents. But still, it's the execution that I think the Ducks are doing really well. Down on the goal line settings, we've seen Jordan Davison. He's up to 7 or 8 touchdowns now on the year, all on those goal line sets, and really they've never been stopped. And I think at the end of the first half today, they were 17 for 17, I think, on the season for red zone trips and scoring touchdowns. I think. I can't think off the top of my head that they ever actually made it to the red zone in the second half either without scoring. And last year we saw how big of an impact that had on Texas, especially in that semifinal game against Ohio State. And like I've said in these streams before, it's so big, these little things that all add up to making a championship contender. And I think the Ducks so far through 4 games are showing they have so many of these little traits and little habits and abilities that just really embody a championship contender. And so I really think this team can go far because of these small traits that they're doing. It's how do you improve off of a 12-0 season or a 13-0 Big Ten championship winning season? And it's these little things. Obviously, in the second half, we saw some penalties come up. I'm fine with it just because I don't want Dante Moore getting hit whenever they're up by 30 points. So, yeah, I'd rather the offensive line hold and we stall when we're up to 30 points, and not have your quarterback get laid out in a rivalry game where they certainly want to take his head off. So I'm totally fine with it. I don't know how much those will come up next week, but the Ducks proved from the Oklahoma State game to the Northwestern game that they were able to clean up penalties, so I think the Ducks will be just fine. In the second half, early on, we saw again another concerning lack of communication on passing off zone assignments. Again, I think they can get that cleaned up within a week, particularly focusing on what route concepts Penn State can run. And honestly, Penn State's offense has been a little rusty, a little shaky to start the year, and then they were also on a bye week this week. And I think that's going to be a huge advantage for the Ducks, being that the Ducks had, live action today, versus it being 14 days between games, and the games that Penn State has played so far, while they're beating their opponents by an average of over 38 points per game, they have been settling for field goals far too often. They've kicked the most field goals in all of FBS so far this season. Just that they shouldn't. They've played Nevada, Villanova, and FIU. They should be scoring touchdowns every time, like we've seen by the Ducks, who have played Montana State, Oklahoma State, Northwestern, and now Oregon State. The Ducks have kicked 3 field goals, I think, so far. So that's one of those little things that, while on paper the Ducks and the Nittany Lions are very comparable on talent, it's those little things like not settling for field goals and getting in the end zone and executing inside the 5 and inside the 10-yard line that are the difference makers between teams with all this elite talent. Like we saw between Texas and Ohio State last year. Again, very comparable in that semifinal match. And they just proved that it's the little things that are the biggest difference makers in the end, whenever you have teams with all the 5 stars and all the 4-star talent. Again, in the comments and chat, would love to hear from you guys. What are you guys concerned about moving forward next week for the Penn State game? How big of a concern is the run defense for you guys? Do you guys think it'll get cleaned up? How much do you guys think the Ducks are holding back before the Nittany Lion game next week? I think that's a discussion that I think needs to be had. I don't know if we've seen the Ducks' full capabilities yet because of the way that the schedule fell. Because of the way that the schedule fell and Ducks having not as strong opponents the first 4 games, and then having their biggest game of the year, the 5th game of the season. Last year it was even a few weeks later. I think it was 2 or 3 weeks later, whenever the Ducks played Ohio State at home. But this is Penn State. They've had this game circled all off season. It's only the 5th game of the season, which I can't believe we're already almost 5 games into the season. But I think the Ducks have been holding a lot back. I'm a little concerned about the run defense because, again, that should be something that you should be able to stop against these opponents. But I do think the Ducks have been holding back certain things for the Nittany Lions, and it'll be interesting to see that next week. But back to this game. I'm so impressed by the running back room. I know I talk about it every stream, but I'm just so impressed by the patience and the pass blocking. And again, those little things, they're not just big explosive playmakers and fast, and they can make guys miss in open space, and they're great at catching and blah, 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 blah. But they're all phenomenal pass blockers. They're all incredibly patient. They are all great, blocking for each other. And I think a lot of players on this Ducks roster, not just in the running back room, but I think as a whole, they all really enjoy playing for Oregon. They all really enjoy playing for Dan Lanning. And in my head, he reminds me a lot of Dan Campbell in the NFL. I don't know how many of you guys watch the NFL or are big into it, but it's Dan Lanning is so big on culture, and Dan Campbell is also big on culture. And there's so many guys that are just proud to be wearing that uniform, and it's kind of a screw you to what a lot of people say about modern college football, and that the NIL and transfer portal make players not loyal, and they don't care about the team. They just care about, the biggest paycheck they can get, and blah 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 blah. But I think Dan Lanning's team is proving that's not correct. That these players clearly love playing for Oregon. The way that they all get down whenever it's time to shout at the end of the third quarter, everyone clearly loves playing for the Ducks. They love playing for Dan Lanning, and that's just that culture. I think is just amazing. That's going to perpetuate not just this season, but for seasons to come. I've talked about it in other videos and in comments before, but I don't know if this team is even at its peak. I think this technically should have been a rebuilding team, but because of what we've seen, I think the Ducks are perfectly capable and definitely championship contenders this season. But I think their likelihood of winning a championship only increases for years to come. When you look at all the young talent that is already contributing now, I mean, the running back room is the biggest, probably well-known example, with De'Aaron Hill and Jordan Davison that they were talking about, and the guy who was getting some carries at the end as well. What's his name? DeJuan Riggs, who's a redshirt freshman. De'Aaron Hill is a true freshman. Jay Harris is a redshirt freshman. No, I'm sorry, he's a junior. Jordan Davison is a true freshman. So 3 of the Ducks' biggest contributing running backs are all either in their first year of eligibility. But I mean, if we look at the quarterback room that I made a video about, if you haven't already, go check it out. Austin Novosad is the same year as Dante, so he's only in his second year of eligibility. And then you have Luke Moga, who's a phenomenal runner that we've seen a little bit this year. Then there's Achilles Smith Jr., who's a true freshman, is probably going to be redshirted this year. I mean, the wide receiver room, obviously, with Corian Moore. And then the defensive secondary that I've talked about a lot. The defensive line is incredibly deep, with guys like Elijah Rushing and Blake Purchase that we don't really see a lot, but these young guys are going to be contributors and are already contributing this year. In the secondary, Aaron Flowers, Brandon Finney Jr., Ife Obadegwu. You guys know how much I love Trey McNutt, and I saw him jumping around during shout today on that broken leg. So I'm hoping he may be back in a couple of weeks, and I'd love to see him back in a couple of weeks. But I digress. Everyone in the running back room is so talented, but then also so patient, so willing to pass block and so willing to run block for their fellow teammates. It's really hard not to love this team and love everything about what Dan Lanning is doing in Eugene. And this is the point of the game where we started to see those bad mistakes by Alex Harkey. He allowed the first sack of the season, which I think is really impressive. Even though the Ducks have played lesser opponents, it's still impressive to not give up a sack until the 4th game. We started to see some holds and stuff like that. But it was the touchdown pass to Jeremiah McClellan, I believe, late in the 3rd quarter, that I was just so impressed with Dante Moore's understanding of reading the coverage. He knew that so there was kind of a dig route going inside, and then there was a that was going to pull the linebacker, and then there was a Jeremiah McClellan running on a post that ultimately got the touchdown. So what I think is impressive is that first he understood what the intent of that play was. He knew that the dig route was going to pull that linebacker. And then he also threw the ball to Jeremiah McClellan before Jeremiah McClellan was even out of his break, before he even started to run the post. And again, that's that amazing anticipation, and that's what NFL scouts will drool over. They want guys that play with anticipation, because in the NFL, those windows are extremely tight, and that was an NFL play with the accuracy, with the timing, the processing. I believe Oregon State blitzed on that play too, so Dante Moore had to stand in the pocket, and he knew he was hot. Like, everything about that play was an NFL play by Dante Moore, and I'm incredibly impressed by it. I may actually do a breakdown in a video upcoming this week, just breaking down everything that Dante Moore did correct on that play. And then lastly, perfect ball placement right on the face mask to Jeremiah McClellan. That's exactly where that ball had to be, because again, the Beavers played decent pass coverage. Dante Moore just had better ball placement. Let's see. I thought the hurdle by Jaden Lamar was hilarious. It was just so unnecessary. The Ducks this year have done a lot of unnecessary hurdling. And the Beaver defender was standing straight up, like they were saying on the broadcast. That's incredibly impressive. Um, so it just shows how incredibly talented the Ducks running back room is. That Jaden Lamar is the second or third string running back, and he can hurdle a grown man standing straight up. So very impressive. Great job by the Duck strength and conditioning program to be able to have all these Duck players be able to hurdle like that. Let's see. And another example of Dante Moore showing excellent processing ability is the touchdown pass to Gary Bright Jr. This was the one with the fake jet sweep action to Jaden Lamar. And then, again, that kind of opened up the middle of the field for Garrett Bryan Jr. to attack the cover two middle field open play by the defense. And there's this, let me take a step back. Last year, there was one play against UCLA that I runs through my head a lot of Dylan Gabriel throwing a seam ball to the end zone. I forget who it was for the receiver, but because Dylan Gabriel didn't have the arm strength that Dante Moore has, it was a hospital ball, and I think the player actually did. I don't think he ended up with a concussion, but he kind of got his head rocked a little bit and had to come out for a couple of plays. But having a player that can attack the middle of the field, because Dante Moore is taller, I don't know if any of you guys have paid attention to NFL analysts over the last couple of years, but people talk about Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson and different guys who can't see the middle of the field because they're on the shorter side. But Dante Moore is, first of all, taller, but he also has the arm strength to be able to attack the middle of the field. And that's so important. Obviously more important than the NFL game, but being able to do it at college level is incredibly impressive and is also another thing that can help propel your team to the promised land, to a championship level. And Dante Moore just attacks the middle of the field so well. And I think that's really big, especially with Will Stein's offense, where he loves to get his playmakers to the outside on quick screens and swing passes and stuff like that. But having a guy that can then basically counter that by attacking the middle of the field and having to keep a defense honest, it's kind of like being balanced in the passing game. Like you can't just defend the outside or you can't just defend the inside. The defense really has to defend the entire field when it comes to pass plays and pass defense. And then again, as we got later on in the game, the offensive line got a little bit sloppier. But again, I'm totally fine with it. I didn't want Dante's head to get ripped off up 30 points, so totally fine with them holding. Next, I'm going to go down through some stats of the game, but again, would love to hear from you guys in chat. What were you guys most impressed with? What was maybe a little disappointing to you guys? What were your favorite plays of the game? What are you guys thinking moving forward going to next week? Would love to hear from you guys in the comments and in chat. So first, I want to break down some team stats. Again, very impressed with the balance by the Ducks, and today I think was their biggest difference between their number of passing yards and rushing yards on offense, and it was only 25-yard difference. They had 305 yards passing and 280 yards rushing. Just amazing balance by the Ducks so far through 4 games, which is incredibly impressive. Like the broadcasters were saying, I think Will Stein absolutely needs to be in contention for the Broyles Award, just because of his ability to, first of all, get the best of his players, get the ball into the hands of all these different playmakers and spread the wealth around, really, and also call extremely balanced games, and knowing the strengths of his team, knowing the weaknesses, etc. The Ducks 4 of 10 on third downs, not awesome. That was definitely a weak point, and you definitely saw that, and that's why they had to punt a little bit more. But 305 yards passing on 21 of 31, so what's that, over around 2/3, so 67%, so that's a little bit less than Dante's been, but I mean 67% is still very good, especially at the college level for accuracy. Almost 10 yards per pass. Again, that just highlights that as the game went on, the Ducks were able to complete more and more of those explosive plays that they weren't connecting on in the first quarter. 280 yards rushing against an FBS opponent is incredibly impressive, even though Oregon State's struggling a little bit this year. Still, that's very impressive to be able to do. especially averaging 6 yards per carry. And they were up by 30 points most of the second half. So they were running the ball a lot more. They did that on 46 rush attempts. So incredibly impressive by the Ducks. 5 penalties for 40 yards. Not bad. Not great. As I've said multiple times, some of those penalties are perfectly excusable. 36 minutes on time of possession, that's big. Like I've said on the Northwestern stream and on this stream, it's so important in these games where you're playing an opponent with maybe a less talent than you have. It's important to control time of possession, control the clock, keep your offense on the field so you can have those explosive plays, and rather not let the other team keep your explosive offense off the field. So very impressed with the balance shown by the Ducks team. And then we'll go to the box score. Dante Moore, 305 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's a great game. The rushing attack, again, we saw an incredible balance. And like I've said before, that's amazing for longevity. In what we're hoping is going to be, a 16-game season? 13 with the Big Ten championship. If they win that, then that would be, worst case scenario would be the round of 12, round of 8, round of 4 to, so plus 4, so 17 games. Having, such a deep running back rotation where your leading rusher only has 12 touches, especially with your running back 1 not playing, that's huge. 12 carries, 70 yards, the leading rusher for the Ducks, Jaden Lamar, almost 6 yards per carry, with a long rush of 22 yards. We had another guy with Dante Moore had a 28-yard rush. Mekhi Hughes had a 19-yard rush. DeJuan Riggs had a 19-yard rush. And then obviously the punter, James Ferguson Reynolds, had that amazing 21-yard. It technically is a fake, but I like the broadcasters say, I like the run punt option. That's more of what that play is. Kenyon Sadiq, it was funny. You saw him turn around in the middle of the play and realize that the ball wasn't kicked. And you saw him kind of like kick into gear. I thought that was pretty funny. And then receiving, the Ducks had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different guys with a reception. Again, in an FBS game, that's just incredibly impressive. The Ducks are doing this every game, so clearly this isn't just a game plan. This is their offense, which is huge for longevity, huge for attracting recruiting prospects. It's huge for attracting transfer portal prospects. It's just great all around if you can spread the wealth and have a lot of different guys do well. And again, like Dan Campbell, I think, does with the Detroit Lions, and like Dan Lanning is doing with the Oregon Ducks, if you block, you get the rock. And clearly, the guys that got the ball today, Garrett Bryant Jr., DeCorian Moore, Kenyon Sadiq, Malik Benson, all these guys, they take blocking both in the pass game and run game very seriously, and that's why they're awarded with the rock. Garrett Bryant Jr., the leading receiver, 3 receptions for 65 yards and a tutty. He obviously, I think 49 of his yards came on that big touchdown pass by Dante Moore. Let's see. I like the way that the Ducks get Jamari Johnson involved, and while he doesn't have the flashiest numbers to start the year, only 3 receptions for 28 yards, and 2 of them came today. He also has a couple rush. That's weird. I thought he had a couple of rushing attempts on the year, but I guess not. I just like the way that they get Jamari Johnson the ball, and I like that they understand the different skill sets of Kenyon Sadiq and Jamari Johnson and what's the third string tight end that came in at the end? Because Oregon Ducks depth chart. What's his name? Saleapaga? Roger Saleapaga? Sorry if I'm butchering that, but all 3 of those tight ends have very unique skill sets, and I like that Will Stein recognizes that, and he's willing to put them in different positions to succeed. I think a lot of times, especially in the NFL and in college, both fans and coaches just kind of want plug and play players. They want the exact same tight end that if one goes down, they can just insert the next one, and it's the exact same thing. And Will Stein recognizes that he has three very talented tight ends and he has so many talented wide receivers, and you just got to put those guys in position to succeed, and it will ultimately take your team a lot farther versus having one mold of a tight end and one mold of a wide receiver and only allowing people to play within that box, versus allowing them to flourish, um, you know, in their most natural roles. Kenyon Sadiq, he's more of a Kyle Pitts kind of role, if I'm being totally honest, in the way that, especially they used him in Florida, in a way that in a way that the Atlanta Falcons are using Kyle Pitts this year, is what they're doing with Kenyon Sadiq. They have him more as a big slot receiver. They have him settle down in zones a lot. They'll like to have him on the outside for being able to block on those quick screens to Will Stein. So I think they're using Kenyon Sadiq a lot in the Kyle Pitts role. And then you have Jamar Johnson, and he's a lot bigger of a guy. I think he's more of the oh man, I can't. He's not a Colston Loveland. Again, that's kind of more of a Kenyon Sadiq, but a big blocking tight end that is also a great seam beater. And then Saga. Oh man, I gotta learn this guy's name. Saleapaga. Um, he's I think more closer to Kenyon Sadiq. Obviously not as strong because no one's as strong as Kenyon Sadiq, but more of a receiving tight end. And Will Stein is using all of those guys in roles that they're very comfortable with and where they excel. And I think that Will Stein deserves a lot of credit for that as well. On defense, Bryce Betcher finishes with 10 tackles. He took this game very personally, and he has just taken another step forward this year in his ability to play sideline to sideline. Every hit he was delivering today was so hard, and I'm just so impressed with Bryce Betcher, and I think he's a lot more vocal of a leader this year. I think he certainly was that last year, but I think he's taken another leap forward this year in that capacity. Dylan Thieneman very quietly had another 5 tackles. I didn't realize that. He was a little quieter today. Aaron Flowers, I think, came up big in a lot of great pass defense moments and run defense moments. Let's see. Like I said at the beginning of the stream, I'm so impressed with Jerry Mixon. I love Jerry Mixon. I think he's probably one of my favorite Duck players so far this year, just with his ability and his effort in the pass defense. I think it really complements this team extremely well. Coming into this season, I was most concerned probably about the linebacker core, not for the top end talent that they had with Bryce Betcher, but I was a little bit worried about depth. And I think the Ducks are really proving me wrong in that this year. I think the argument could certainly be made that the linebacker group is actually the strongest. Let me know in chat and comments what you guys think is the strongest position group on the Ducks defense, whether it's the front line, linebackers, or the secondary. But I'm incredibly impressed with Bryce Betcher so far this year, both as a leader and as a sideline to sideline talent. But I mean, Devin Jackson, Jerry Mixon also providing a great support there. Let's see. Yeah. Other than that, a great win by the Ducks. Looking forward to next week. So they are playing Penn State. That game will be in prime time. Oregon, Penn State. So that'll be 4:30 Pacific time. That's going to be at Penn State in Beaver Stadium. Going to be a whiteout. I bet College Game Day is probably going to be there. It's going to be a good one. Where's the current betting line on this one? So looks like the Penn State's favored by 3.5 points. I will do some more analysis throughout this week, but honestly, the entire offseason and much of the beginning of the season, I've kind of written this one off as a loss. Beaver Stadium is just an incredibly tough environment to play in. I don't think it says anything about the Ducks. However, the Ducks are proving to me that they are a way smarter team than I thought they were going to be this year, just with all the talent and leadership that they lost, from last year's team. But also, again, they do those little things. And, for example, things like the ability to run, that translates on the road. being able to limit explosive plays that I think they can do against Penn State, that translates on the road, and that can help take that whiteout crowd out of the game. So I think it's going to be a tough game. I think if I'm betting on 3.5, I would probably bet at least the Ducks to cover, if not win outright right now. I'll do some more. I want to go back and watch some of Penn State's games. Drew Aller just hasn't looked in sync so far. I mean, he's 57 of 88 for 4 touchdowns against Villanova, FIU, and who was their first game? Nevada. I mean, obviously they have a great two-headed monster in Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, and that is the Ducks' weakness is, run defense. But even, I don't know. I don't think the Penn State offense has been looking as dominant as a lot of people assumed it was going to be. That was everyone's biggest concern coming into this year. Everyone thought Drew Aller was going to take this biggest leap forward. And I also want to take this moment too to talk about Drew Aller. I don't think he's as mentally tough as he should be. There is something wrong where he is tall, he's big, he has a great arm, but he has never been able to put everything together for an entire 4 quarters. And I think we saw that last year in the Big Ten Championship was the closest he's ever been to putting everything together. But also just look at his body language. He throws a lot of temper tantrums. I'm glad I'm getting all this out. I've had this in my mind forever. He throws a lot of temper tantrums. He's not a leader. Like I don't, from a skills standpoint, I think he's a great NFL prospect. And he looks very much like the NFL mold. He's tall, he has a strong arm. I think he has a decent processing ability. But it's the between the snaps that has me questioning a lot. And I don't think I think that's really holding him back. Is there something in his mental psyche that is just really holding back Drew Aller from being an elite prospect? And that, I think, honestly, what makes Dante Moore a better quarterback and a better prospect is Dante Moore clearly has a mental psyche that is still also growing and developing and maturing. And especially in the middle of a season, that's really hard to do. And I think Dante Moore is still getting better every game. He's doing things a little bit better and a little bit better. And even like his misses today, I think they were starting to be smaller and smaller and smaller. So I think Dante Moore so far is definitely a better NFL prospect than Drew Aller is, because I think Dante Moore is a little bit more accurate than Drew Aller is. I think he's asked to do a little bit more in the Oregon offense versus what Drew Aller is. And I think also between the snaps and as a leader, I think Dante Moore is a much better prospect than Drew Aller is. So I'm kind of hoping the Ducks defense can take advantage of that next week. I think if the Ducks can somehow find a way to fluster Drew Aller early in the game on the road, I think having the big home whiteout stadium, I think is sometimes a disadvantage to Drew Aller because he puts so much pressure on himself and he gets cooked really easily mentally. And I think the Ducks can really take advantage of that. So I think that's got to be the game plan for the Ducks is get in Drew Aller's head early, often, really throw him off. And I think that would be a major key to success. And I think also the Ducks' ability this year to be able to play a lot more man coverage, I think will be helpful as well. Still not seeing any dominant receivers like we saw last year from Penn State. And again, that was something that really held them back in the Big Ten Championship against Oregon was their lack of downfield threats in the passing game. So while Drew Aller has the ability to throw the ball downfield with accuracy, they don't necessarily have the guys to cook. They didn't have the guys last year to cook I'm going to say slightly less talented corners by the Ducks. But now the Duck corners are even better. So good luck cooking them. So let me know in the comments y'all's thoughts. What do you guys think about the game next week? It's going to be a big game. I think it's kind of a season-defining game, if I'm being honest. I'm glad the Ducks didn't have any trap games or didn't get caught looking ahead in these recent weeks. I definitely kind of thought that they would just because of how impactful of a game the Oregon-Penn State game will be, not only on these two teams' seasons, but on college football as a whole. This will very much change the trajectory of a lot of teams moving forward. I think the Ducks have a decent chance. I think the Ducks have a really good chance. Yeah. What did you guys think of the game today, and what do you guys think about moving forward for the Penn State game? Let me know in the chat and in comments. I'm just doing a quick scoreboard check real quick. Cool. Yeah, if you guys don't have any question, comments, things in the chat or in comments, then I think I will log off. Big win for the Ducks, and big week ahead. Looking forward to the game next week. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and I will catch you guys next time. Thanks.